Welcome to Constantly Curious, the podcast where we dive into fascinating, strange, and often mind-bending topics that make you see the world and yourself a little differently. Today, we're talking about Cotard syndrome, a rare and truly bizarre mental condition where people genuinely believe they are dead, don't exist, or have lost parts of their bodies. And we'll start this episode with a personal story that hits close to home. A few months ago, a close friend of mine went through something truly heartbreaking. His mom, a lively, creative, and deeply caring woman, began behaving in ways no one could explain. Despite all evidence to the contrary, she was convinced she was dead. She stopped taking care of herself because she believed her body needed no nourishment. Of course, my friend and his siblings sprang into action and got her some help. But even with treatment, it was a long journey back to a semblance of normalcy. This was my first introduction to Cotard syndrome, a condition so rare and so surreal that it almost sounds like something out of a horror movie. So, what exactly is Cotard syndrome? This rare mental disorder is also called Cotard's delusion or walking corpse syndrome. It was first described in 1880 by a French neurologist named Jules Cotard. He had a patient who insisted she had no brain, no nerves, and no internal organs. She believed she was a walking shell of a person already dead. She called herself Mademoiselle X and refused to eat, ultimately succumbing to starvation. At its core, Cotard's syndrome is a form of delusion where a person's sense of self is so distorted that they believe they're no longer alive. Some think they're missing vital organs, while others are convinced they've lost their souls. Interestingly, Cotard's syndrome is often linked to severe depression, schizophrenia, or neurological conditions like brain injuries or dementia. It's not just a psychological phenomenon. It often has a physiological basis too. Brain scans of people with Cotard's show abnormal activity in areas that regulate emotions and self-awareness. In my friend's case, his mom was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Let's get into the science of this phenomenon. Researchers believe Cotard syndrome arises from a combination of psychological and neurological factors. Some of the key players include disconnection between brain regions. Studies suggest that Cotard's may result from disrupted communication between the fusiform gyrus, which helps recognize faces, and the amygdala, which processes emotions. This disconnect can cause a person to feel detached from themselves, as if they're observing a stranger's body instead of their own. Underlying mental health issues. Severe depression is often a precursor. When depression reaches psychotic levels, it can warp a person's perception of reality, leading to delusions like those seen in Cotard's. Brain injuries or illnesses. Some cases of Cotard's have been linked to strokes, brain tumors, or encephalitis. These conditions can damage the areas of the brain responsible for self-awareness and body perception. Let's explore some real-life cases that illustrate just how deeply Cotard syndrome can affect a person. One of the most famous cases involved a man referred to as Graham. After a failed suicide attempt, Graham was convinced he had died and that his brain had stopped functioning. He described feeling like his mind was empty, like his thoughts had ceased to exist. Doctors ran scans and found reduced activity in his frontal and parietal lobes, areas critical for consciousness and self-awareness. Another case involved a woman who believed she had no blood. She was so convinced that she refused medical treatment, even when she became severely dehydrated. Only after extensive therapy and medication did her delusion subside. Although Cotard syndrome can be devastating, it's not a hopeless diagnosis. Recovery is possible, often through a combination of treatments. Medication, antidepressants, antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers can help address the underlying mental health conditions. Therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is often used to challenge and reframe the delusional beliefs. Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. In severe cases, ECT has been shown to be remarkably effective as it can reset brain activity and alleviate delusions. It's important to note that early intervention is key. The sooner someone with Cotard's gets help, the better their chances of recovery. Before we wrap up, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Cotard's syndrome isn't just a medical condition. It raises profound questions about identity, consciousness, and what it means to be alive. If your brain can convince you that you're dead, what does that say about the fragile relationship between perception and reality? Philosophers have long debated the nature of existence and self-awareness. Cotard's forces us to confront these questions in a visceral way. It's a humbling reminder of how much we take our sense of self for granted and how easily it can be disrupted. Cotard syndrome is one of the strangest and most unsettling conditions out there, but it also offers incredible insight into the workings of the human mind. If you've ever experienced or known someone who's dealt with this condition, I hope this episode sheds some light on what they might have gone through. Thank you for tuning in to Constantly Curious. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if there's a topic you're curious about, let me know. I'm always looking for new mysteries to explore. Until next time, stay curious.